When the snow returned, a story of quiet love, lingering echoes, and the gentle weight of memory. The first snowfall of the season came quietly, covering the town in a hush that seemed almost sacred. The snow settled like breath held too long, soft against the eaves of the houses, powdering the narrow, winding streets in muted white. The window panes of the small bookstore on the corner blurred beneath its touch, and beyond the river, the mountains stood like watchful sentinels wrapped in mist. I didn't come back because I missed this place. I came back because I had run out of anywhere else to go. 10 years had passed since I last walked those streets, yet they greeted me with a familiarity that felt more like an ache than comfort. The names on the storefronts had changed, but the scent of roasted chestnuts near the train station remained, lingering like an old song I once knew by heart. The wind carried with it memories I had tried to bury, moments so sharp they could slice through silence. The house on the hill hadn't changed much, though it bore the weight of time in every sagging board and chipped corner. It stood quietly, almost as if waiting for someone to return. My mother had lived there until the end. I hadn't made it back in time, not for her last breath, not even for the echoes after it. When I arrived, the remnants of her life had already been sifted and sorted. Her belongings were folded, boxed, and tucked away with reverent finality. She hadn't left a letter. Only her absence remained, thick and unspoken in every corner. There were no tears. Not because I wasn't broken, but because the breaking had happened slowly, years ago, and what remained was hollow but steady. I unpacked my suitcase, a few worn sweaters, some books, and a bundle of old photographs I hadn't dared to look at in years. I moved into my childhood bedroom, where the wallpaper peeled at the corners and the scent of lavender and dust hung in the air like a ghost. The people in town remembered me. They didn't ask questions. They spoke in soft tones, as if uncertain whether I was someone they should mourn or forgive. I took a job at the library part-time, quiet and manageable. I spent my days organizing shelves I had once wandered through as a child, letting the smell of old pages settle into my clothes. In the evenings, I walked along the river, tracing steps I had long ago abandoned. I began writing again, not stories, but small things. Lists of the plants I remembered from my mother's garden, snippets of memories too quiet for words. One afternoon, as the snow began to loosen its grip, I saw him. He stood at the train station, his shoulders drawn inward against the cold. A thin coat clung to his frame, and his hair, once carefully styled, curled at the edges, kissed by snowflakes. The suitcase at his side looked as tired as he did. Time had aged him, but not beyond recognition. He hadn't changed so much that I could pretend not to know him. But we passed without acknowledgement, just two people walking through the same story from different pages. Over the next few weeks, his presence lingered at the edges of my days. At the market, in the park, near the bookstore. The town was too small for avoidance to last long. But neither of us made the first move. We became shadows in each other's periphery, always present but never touching. As winter receded, spring crept in timidly. The snow melted in slow, reluctant patches, and green returned in careful whispers. I took longer walks then, passing the old schoolyard and the park where we had once dared each other to jump from swings. These places were fossils of a life I could no longer enter, only observe. They held pieces of laughter, the outlines of embraces, and the ghosts of what might have been. While shelving books one rainy afternoon, I found a photograph tucked within the pages of a novel I hadn't touched since high school. We were younger in that frozen moment, standing on a bridge with the river glowing behind us, smiling, still whole. I stared at it until the image blurred, then slid it back between the pages and returned the book to its shelf. I didn't need to ask who had left it. The answer had always been waiting quietly. That evening I lit a candle on the windowsill, a simple gesture, not a cry for connection, just an acknowledgement. A way of saying I see you, without expecting anything back. Some things return even when you don't call them. Some people do too. As spring found its rhythm, I returned to the garden. The earth was stubborn after the freeze, but my hands learned its patterns again. I used my mother's tools, their handles smoothed by time and use. The soil smelled like something sacred, like memory and promise woven together. The garden didn't rush to bloom. Neither did I. Life beneath the surface is always the first to awaken, even if unseen. Then came the camellia. One morning, I opened the door to find a small clay pot waiting. Pink blossoms bloomed against the chill, defiant and delicate. No note, no name, but I knew. He had always remembered that camellias were my mother's favorite, that I used to trace their petals with my fingers, whispering wishes I never spoke aloud. After that, other gifts began to appear. A scarf I had lost years ago now hung over the fence. A box of strawberries, the kind we used to pick together, waited quietly by the back step. A small wooden carving rested on the porch rail, something he had once tried to teach me, his hands guiding mine. They were all quiet offerings, absent of expectation. They were not apologies. They were something softer. Echoes of care. In return, I began to leave things too. A glove was folded neatly on the park bench. A stone was placed at the base of the old bridge, a folded note tucked into the hollow of a tree. We were building a language again, not with words, but with intention, with space, with memory. We crossed paths more often by the river at the station and near the bench beneath the willow tree. One day our eyes met. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. I nodded, he nodded back. That was all. But in that quiet, something shifted. Summer arrived in waves of warmth, steady and golden. The town bloomed into color, roses spilling over garden fences, hydrangeas bowing under their own weight, and sunbeams slanting through the bookstore windows like forgotten letters. The garden, once hesitant, now thrived with quiet certainty. My days unfolded in soft patterns, morning weeding, afternoons beneath the willow with a book, and evenings spent watching the sky bleed from blue to amber. He became part of the landscape, not as someone who intruded, but as someone who simply was. His presence drifted through my days like the wind through curtains, unannounced but welcome. Sometimes he passed by the garden gate while I watered the roses. Sometimes I found footprints on the trail near the riverbank, parallel to mine but never overlapping. I never reached for more than what was offered. I didn't look to recapture what we had once been, nor to rewrite the endings that had already unfolded. What we shared now wasn't a continuation. It was a new chapter written with gentler hands. The scar on my heart where our past had lived no longer burned. It pulsed instead, like a reminder of something that once mattered deeply. Something that had shaped me, even if it hadn't stayed. At the library, I came across another photograph. This one was different, blurred at the edges, as though it had been handled too often. We sat on the steps of the school gymnasium, arms brushing. Our expressions weren't of joy, but of stillness, as though caught mid-thought. I kept this one, not as a keepsake, but as a recognition of the lives we once inhabited. The summer wore on. The heat softened into late August gold, and the air grew slower, heavier. I spent more time beneath the tree on the hill, watching children race through the field below. The initials carved into the bench had almost disappeared, but the wood still remembered the shape of our laughter. I traced the faded lines with my thumb and let the memories come, not to hold on to them, but to finally let them go. Then the rain arrived. It came without warning, heavy and insistent, washing the dust from the rooftops and turning the streets into mirrors. The garden soaked it in gratefully, bending under the weight of the sky. I watched from the porch as the storm passed, leaving behind the smell of earth and something more subtle, renewal. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, too full of stories that no longer needed telling. I wandered from room to room, touching the corners of photographs, brushing my fingers along the spines of books that hadn't been opened in years. Everything held the shape of someone who was no longer here, yet nothing felt lonely. When I stepped outside, the sky was clearing. The stars blinked behind thin clouds, and the air held a chill that whispered of the coming autumn. A small stone sat on the porch railing, smooth and round with a faint carving etched on its face. A camellia unfinished but unmistakable. I ran my finger along the lines and closed my eyes. It wasn't a promise, it was a memory. The days shortened, the leaves began to fall. Autumn returned with the scent of wood smoke and the sound of brittle leaves crackling underfoot. I wore sweaters that still smelled of the old city and tied my scarf the way my mother used to. The bench beneath the tree became my favorite place again. The view hadn't changed, just my understanding of it. He still came and went like the tide, sometimes closer, sometimes distant, but always there. We shared the same streets, the same silences. And that was enough. We had become fluent in pauses, in the absence of explanation. Some love stories don't ask to be resumed. They just evolve into something quieter, steadier. I visited the cemetery before the frost returned. My mother's headstone was simple, the letters slightly worn. I brought camellias, even though they were out of season. I sat beside her grave and spoke nothing aloud. But she would have understood. She always had. Winter approached again, slower this time. The snow came not with force but with grace, like a curtain drawing gently closed. It settled into the grooves of the porch, covered the empty flower beds, and turned the garden paths into softened sketches. I walked the same loops through town, to the river, and past the old train station. Familiar, yes, but now without the weight. I passed by the park where we used to meet. Children had etched their own stories into the swings and slides. Our names no longer lived there. And I was glad. The past deserved to rest. I left a final gift on the bench, a notebook worn, filled with pages of scattered thoughts, plant names, and single words. I didn't write who it was for. I didn't need to. Some stories don't need conclusions, only acknowledgments. A soft closing of the page. That evening, I stood at the window once more, watching as the snow began to fall again. It landed quietly, like before, like always. The world outside blurred into a soft hush, and in that stillness, I felt full. Love had come and gone, and in some ways it had stayed. Not in the shape it once held, not in the promise of something enduring, but in the gentle understanding that it had mattered, that it had changed us, that it didn't need to be resurrected to still live within us. I returned to the garden the next morning. Snow covered the raised beds, but beneath it, I knew the seeds were waiting. Everything important happens quietly, beneath the surface.